In this tutorial, let's talk about a slightly more complicated case for writing the if statements. Basically, we're going to say if something is true, we go this way. Otherwise, we do that way. So how do we specify otherwise in Java? So we got to learn about a new keyword called else. Okay, so let me just illustrate this by a very simple example to you. So let's simply just do right click on the projects and then say new and then say class over here. Okay. And then we'll say if statements and app number 2. Okay, and then we'll put to generate a main method over here. Okay, let's see what kind of problem we're going to solve. Before we try to specify the problem, let's just set up the scanner. Okay, scanner. Okay, input is new scanner from the keyboard system.in and then input dot close. Okay, so now let's think about the problem. The problem is we're going to prompt the user to enter. So we're going to talk about a very simplified version of a bank account, which means the user is going to enter some integer balance, to enter an integer balance, and then prompt the user to enter an integer amount to withdraw. Okay, that's easy. And then display the remaining balance after withdrawal. Okay, that's kind of the problem we're trying to solve. And of course, we have to be a little bit careful over here. So now, since we know how to use selection using if, and also we're going to later on introduce you to else. So we want to say, we want to make the application a little bit more useful by saying if the user actually makes some mistake, we have to be able to tell them, oh, I'm sorry. For example, if the balance to start with is simply negative, and we're going to say, no, we cannot create your account. So you have to run the program again with some valid inputs. So now we're going to put it here informally. So there are 3 possible ways that things may go wrong, in which case we shouldn't really fulfill the user's request. 3 possible errors from the user. Okay. Number 1, the balance value is negative. Okay, which means it's strictly less than 0. Okay, you know what? Let me put it a little more like a Java term. Balance is less than 0. Okay, number 2, if the amount you're trying to withdraw is negative, you don't really want to be able to withdraw minus $1 million if you're the bank, right? Minus $1 million would be very, very bad for the bank, but very, very good for the client though. Okay, but anyway, amount less than 0 should not be allowed. Number 3, we want to make sure that you can only withdraw the amount that you can afford according to your current balance. So you want to make sure amount is less than or equal to the balance. Okay? For example, you should not be able to withdraw $100 if you have less than 100 in the balance, right? Okay, let me make it a little bit more better. So now let's say if the balance is 100 and the amount is, for example, it must be less than or equal to the balance. So can be, for example, less than or equal to 100, 99, 98, and etc. Okay? So that's kind of the errors we want to be able to handle. Okay? Let me show you a very, very naive way to actually handle error, just to introduce the new syntax, and then we try to improve it by using further syntax. Okay, so now let's keep it light for each video. Okay, so now for this one over here, we're going to say basically how do we actually encode all these errors together into a single Boolean condition. Okay, you can see number 1, this is a relational expression. This is a second relational expression. This is a third relational expression. How do we combine relational expressions together? Well, logical operator, right? And we want to say it would be considered as an error if this is the case, or this is the case, or this is the case, rather than saying it must be an error only if all the 3 must be true at the same time, right? It's not the case. So that's something you have to make a decision about. Okay. So now what I would say is, let's try to practice the way we can write Boolean condition using relational and logical operators. I want to say if, okay, I can say if balance. Let me just read the user input first, so variables will make sense. What I would do is I'll say system.out system.out.println. Okay, I'll say enter an integer balance. Okay, and then I'll say, and then I'll read it, and I'll say int balance is assigned to input dot next int. Okay, that's what I have. And I'll just for simplicity, I'm just going to assume the balance and the amount will just be integer. You can make it double for your example if you want to try out. Okay, and then we'll also say system.out.println. Okay, enter an amount to withdraw. Okay, let me put a colon here, just make it look nicer. And then I can say integer, the amount to withdraw will be input.next int. Okay, so we got two amounts over here to play with. So now we want to say if either condition 1 is the case, or condition 2 is the case, or condition 3 is the case. So now basically we just want to combine these two disjunctions together. How do we say that? These three conditions together using disjunction. Very easy. It's going to be very intuitive to write. If it is the case that balance is less than 0. Okay, let me just make sure I spelled it correctly. Balance is less than 0, or amount is less than 0. Okay, or you can just have as many ors as you like. You want to say if any one of these conditions is true, then overall it will be true. Okay, the same idea as if you only have two operands. Okay, or amount is less than or equal to balance. Okay, so now, so that means, oh, by the way, so whatever you put inside this pair of curly brackets is said to be the body of if statements. Okay, basically I'm saying that only this block of code within the curly brackets will only be executed if either this is true, or this is true, or this is true. If all of them happen to be false, which means there's no error, then we'll do something else. So that's a kind of otherwise part. How do we specify otherwise? It's use a keyword called else. So that's the second keyword you have to write to learn in order to write if statements. Okay, we'll simply say else over here. So so body of statements, if statements, and this part here will be the body of the else statements. Okay, if else. So it's either one way or the other. Okay. Okay, let me just put another document here. This block of code is executed only if the if branch condition, which I refer to this particular condition overall, which is disjunction, is true. Okay, let me just copy this line of code, and then I will say that this block of code is executed only if the if branch condition is false. Okay, which means if it is true, execute this block. Otherwise, you execute this block. Okay, either one way or the other. Okay, so now let's see what we can do. If there is an error, in which case we'll just say error. System.out.println, and then we'll simply say error. Launch the launch the program again. Okay, there's some error. Although we don't know which one specifically, but that's okay. For the simplicity for this video, we'll make it like that. Otherwise, there's no error. In that case, we can simply do the following. So now, if that's not an error, so we can do some lines of code that will only be specific to when there's no error. So now what we'll do is we can say balance is assigned to balance minus the amount. Okay, I'm going to trace the code together with you, but let's try to write it down. Okay, so whatever the balance value is minus the amount. Okay, so that means if we are able to reach this line over here, that means this particular branch is actually false. That means the balance is actually larger than or equal to 0, and also the amount is larger than or equal to 0, and also the amount is guaranteed to be, oh, actually, you know what? This is something I got wrong. Okay, so now we want to say the error condition. So it will be considered an error if the amount is strictly larger than or equal to balance. Okay, let me illustrate to you why. If the balance is 100, the amount cannot be, okay, it cannot be things like this. it cannot be 100 because 100 subtract 100 would be 0, which is not allowed. The balance, let's say it has to be strictly larger than 0. That's for our case. Okay, it cannot be 101, 102, and etc. Okay, just a slight mistake I made. But let's program it in. Okay, so now, or the amount, also if we can reach this block over here, that means the balance is larger than or equal to 0, and the amount is larger than or equal to 0, and also the amount is larger than, so over here we're going to change this, okay, to the error condition, larger than or equal to the balance. Then that means that'll be, I will trace the code together with you. Okay, otherwise you might get a little bit confused. But let's see, just write it down and then we'll trace the code together. And then what we will do is we're going to say after this, after that, we're gonna print out system.out.println initial balance. Okay, and then we can say balance after withdrawing, okay, and then we can say the amount has, okay, let me just split that into 2 lines, okay, initial balance after withdrawing this much amount, then system.out.println has the resulting balance, let's say, and then of course whatever the balance is, we're gonna put a balance over here. Okay, so that's the code we can write. Okay, now let's illustrate. Basically, I'm gonna show you 4 different cases. Case number 1, we're going to reach the error case because balance is negative. Case number 2, we're going to reach this particular case error because amount is actually less than 0. Okay, and case number 3, we're going to also print out the error simply because amount is too large. It's already larger than or equal to 0, larger than or equal to balance. And then case number 4, we're going to say none of the 3 errors occur, so which means we can successfully try to withdraw and then print out the resulting balance. So these will be the 4 cases we're going to do. Okay, so let's see exactly how we can do them, and then we'll illustrate on iPad. Okay, all the cases. So what I would do is I'm gonna go back to Package Explorer over here, right click on this app 2, and then run as Java application. Okay, integer balance. Let's say if I simply say this, if I say -20, if I say -20, that means the balance over here will be -20 from here, right? And amount, also the amount, let me say I simply just put 30. Okay, as soon as I do that, basically you can imagine that what's going to happen is like this. So the amount will be 30 over here, and then you can see -20 less than 0 is actually false, right? Oh, sorry, let me say it again. -20 less than 0 will be true. So that means at least one of them is actually true. That means overall it's going to be true. But I'm going to trace in detail. So that means we're going to have error printed out rather than going to the else branch, right? Okay, let's see that, and then I'll illustrate to you. If I say -20 and then withdraw 30, and then it will say error, launch the program again. Okay, but you should know which error it is. Okay, let's launch it again. So let's say initial balance is actually 300, which is valid, but we're gonna withdraw, let's say -1000. Okay, it's also going to say error because you can see even though 300 less than 0 is actually false, but -1000 over here less than 0 will give you true. So that means the conjunction, the disjunction will still be true. Okay, we're gonna do that together. Okay, one more. If we try another one, let's say the amount larger than or equal to balance. Let's say we enter 100 as a balance. We want to withdraw 102, for example. In that case, you're gonna say error, launch the program again. Okay, simply because 102 larger than or equal to 100 is going to be true. That means it's also considered as an error. One more. Final case, we can say, let's say we have 200 and then we try to withdraw 156. In that case, we can say initial balance initial balance 44 after withdrawing 156 has a resulting balance 44. There's something I want to change very quickly, okay? Which I am gonna do it over here, okay? So what I need to do over here is I have balance over here. If I want to rename, okay, let me just do this. I would say initial balance. Okay, initial balance over here. And then I'm just going to copy and paste initial balance. You know what? Let me do it a better way for you. Let me just undo. So now let's say I want to change the name for balance over here to be initial balance. Move your mouse over this balance over here. Okay, move your mouse over, right click, and then you can say refactor, and then you can say rename. So now you can see that we can just rename this variable over here. Well, let's say initial. You can see it's changing every occurrence of balance to initial balance. Enter. Okay, that's something I want to do to begin with. And then I want to do one more thing. Over here, I want to just declare another variable over here just for the final balance. I can say integer resulting balance is assigned to exactly over here. Okay, it's going to be assigned to initial balance minus amount. I'll trace the program together with you, don't worry. Resulting balance, so initial balance over here and also resulting balance. Okay, I think that's what I need. Okay, let's do the code again and then we'll move on to iPad to trace it. Okay, let's say we got 200 over here and then 156. It's going to say initial balance 200 after withdrawing 156 has a resulting balance 44. Okay, that looks correct. Okay, so now what I will do is I'm going to, I'm going to copy and paste the code and then I'll show it to you. Okay, so now what I will do is let me to save some space. Let me just get rid of them just temporarily and then I'll take a snapshot quickly. Okay, let me take a snapshot of this block of code and then we'll trace it together. Okay. Okay, let me just move on to iPad over here. Okay, so now I'm going to paste the code. Okay, it's going to transfer from my computer to iPad. Let's just wait a little bit. And then we can copy and paste the code. Okay, still waiting. Okay, now it's done. Okay, so now let's paste it over here. So that's the block of code over here. Okay, let's now just do this. Eventually, when do okay, let's see this. Yeah, since we got 4 cases to trace, let me be a little bit saving the space over here. Hopefully that's understandable. So what I would do is let me talk about the 4 test cases I'm going to do. So test number 1, we're going to do the balance is simply just going to be negative. Let's say minus 100. Okay, and for test number 2, I'm going to do balance. Let's say the balance. Let's say the amount is, for example, let's say test 1 amount. It doesn't matter. Let's say just 50, for example. And for test number 2, I'm going to put the balance over here would be simply something that's valid. However, the amount is actually negative. So the amount will be, let's say, minus 20, okay? Which should not be allowed, right? So we got test 1 and test 2. Let's now do test 3. Test 3 over here, we can say we set up the balance to be, let's say, 100. And then the amount to be, let's say something that's more than the balance, which is not valid. Let's say 150, right? So finally, we can have test 4. In which case, let's say we got balance over here. Let's say 100. Let's say the amount is 44. Okay, that should be allowed. Okay, so these are the 4 test cases that we want to do. Okay, let me just put it here. Okay, so these are the 4 test cases we're going to trace all together, right? So now let me try to be saving the space a little bit. Okay, so now what I will do is I'm going to use different color. So now let me use red to begin with. So error case number 1. Let's do test case number 1. Okay, over here. So now we're going to prompt the user for the integer balance, but now the user is going to enter minus 100. Okay, that means initial balance over here will be minus 100 over here. Okay, for the first case, and then you just gotta pay attention to the color. Okay, and then so that means when we execute this line and then we execute this line over here, the amount will be 50. Okay, that means amount is going to be 50 from input the next int. And then let's now calculate this very carefully. Okay, so now we know that initial balance is simply minus 100, and then the amount is 50. Okay, and 50, and then minus 100. Let's see how the condition will work out. Okay, so now let's look at this one first. Initial balance less than 0, so minus 100 less than 0 will be true, or 50 less than 0 will be false, or 50 larger than or equal to minus 100 will be true. Okay, so now that means what would that evaluate to be? Okay, so the rule is simple. Since we are doing disjunction over here, as long as one of them is actually true, the result is going to be true. And this true over here simply means there is an error. Okay, so that means overall, the if condition over here, let me just highlight everything over here, overall is simply just going to be true. That means we're going to execute this block of code under the if, the body of the if statements, right? And this whole thing over here is just going to be bypassed. We simply don't execute it. It's either if body or the else body. Okay, so now you will simply just print out error, launch the program again, right? So now if you try to highlight, so this is the execution path. Okay, it's going to be this line over here. Okay, and then it's going to be this line over here, and then it's going to be this line over here, and of course this line as well, and then this line over here, and then this line over here. Okay, and then this line over here, right? That's the execution path. You can see the else part is completely bypassed. Okay, so that's the first one. Okay, let's do the second one together. Okay, it's really important that you understand how this works. Okay, let me see if I can just try to combine these two test cases together. Okay, use different color. So now let me use orange for the second case. For the second case of error, we're going to have balance over here. So now we execute the first line again. So now the balance is going to be 100. Okay, so now that means initial balance, I'm going to put 100 over here. Okay, 100 for the initial balance. And then we're going to execute this line as well. So enter an amount to withdraw. And now we're going to enter minus 20. Okay, that means the amount is now going to be minus 20. Okay, so now let's try to calculate the conditions over here, right? So now we reach this line to calculate if condition to see whether we should go to if branch or the else branch. So now initial balance is at the moment actually 100, right? So that means we have basically, let me write it out, what we're going to check. We have basically 100 less than 0, or the amount is minus 20. Minus 20 less than 0, or the amount is minus 20 larger than or equal to 100. Okay, let me just write it down here too. So initial balance over here is 100, and the amount is minus 20 and minus 20, and over here it is initial balance is 100, right? Yeah, hopefully you can still follow, right? I'm just trying to trace the code together with you. And we know that for this one here, this is false, right? And for here, it is true. And for here, this is also false, right? So now we got false or true or false. And because at least one of them is actually true, so we still get true. That means it's still considered as an error. So that means overall over here, for this particular run, for the orange part, we'll still get true. That means there's still an error, okay? So now that means we're still going to just execute this branch of code, whereas this part over here is also going to be bypassed. Okay, that's what's happening here. Okay, so now we're still going to say error, launch the program again. Okay, hopefully you can see that. Okay, so now what we're going to do is and the execution path will be exactly the same as the red one that we just highlighted. It will be just the same, okay? Even though it's a different cost for the error, okay? You can see in the first case we got true, false, true, and for the second case we got false, true, false. But overall, the disjunction will just give you true. That means there's at least one error over there, okay? Let's now do the third test case, okay? Quickly. Oh, I'm gonna use pink over here, okay? The third test case over here, again, we're gonna execute the first line over here, and then now for the second line, for the initial balance is going to be 100, and then so we're gonna put 100 over here for initial balance, and then we're gonna prompt them for the amount to withdraw is going to be 150. Okay, so over here is going to be let me put it here, 150 for the amounts. Okay. And then, so now what kind of condition are we trying to evaluate? So now initial balance is now 100 and the amount is 150. Okay, you can just pay attention to the color. And then the amount over here is 150 and the initial balance over here is 100. Let's write out the expression over here. So I got basically 100 less than 0 or 150 less than 0, or I got 150 larger than or equal to 100, right? So that's a condition I'm evaluating now. And I know that this is false. So that means this particular error is not the case. And then 150 less than 0 is also false. And now 150, which is the initial balance, and 100 is the amount, is larger than or equal to that. So that means it is true. Because at least one of them is true, for disjunction, it's just going to be true. That means we still got at least one error over there. Okay? So now hopefully you still follow. So now after this, that means we're just going to execute this particular branch over here, just for this particular branch. Whereas this branch for the else will still be bypassed because it's an error. So we're just going to print out this line over here, error, launch the program again. And the execution path will just be, again, the one we just highlighted in red, okay? Only this one, without executing the else branch. Finally, let's have a look at how we can trace the fourth test case where there's no error. Okay, for that, I'm just going to clear up a little bit. I'm just going to maybe choose this one over here. I believe I can resize it a little bit. Let me do that quickly. And then we can just copy and paste a clean version of code. Okay, let me resize this. Okay, I hope that's still readable to you. Okay, let me just make it even smaller. Okay, I think it's still readable to you. So now let me just copy and just paste the same block of code again over here, but I can make it slightly smaller since you're familiar with it already. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do test 4. Okay, I'm gonna use green. Okay. So now we should be expecting a different execution branch in this time, right? Different execution flow. Okay, we execute this line here. We actually ask integer balance, and the balance is going to be 100. So that means initial balance over here is going to be 100 from input and next int. And then we say enter an amount to withdraw. We can enter 44, and then the amount is going to be stored as 44 from input and next int, right? And then what's going to be the expression we're going to evaluate? So when we reach the if branch over here, we're going to evaluate the whole thing. Initial balance is going to be 100, and then the amount is going to be 44. And the amount is 44, and initial balance over here is 100. So let's write out the expression that we're evaluating. We're evaluating 100 less than 0, or 44 less than 0, or 44 larger than or equal to 100. Okay, and apparently you can see that this part here is simply false, which means it is not the case that the initial balance is negative, which means this error does not apply. And now what about this, the second kind of error? Because 44, the amount is less than 0 is also false, which means it is not the case that the amount to withdraw is negative. So this second error also doesn't apply. What about the third kind of error over here? So this is the amount to withdraw, and this is your balance. Okay, so now 44 larger than or equal to balance will be also false, which means it is not the case that the amount to withdraw is larger than or equal to balance. So that's not an error. So that means we got false, false, and false. In the case where all the operands are false for disjunction, overall is simply just going to be false. Okay? So that means evaluating this whole condition over here is going to be giving us false. That means we are not going to execute this body of code inside the if branch. Instead, we're going to execute this block of code, right? This is a block, okay? So now when we execute this block of code, we're going to have as follows. Initial balance, as we said, is simply just going to be 100. And then amount is going to be 44. So 100 minus 44 will be 56. That means we're going to store 56 inside this resulting balance over here, right? So now when we try to print out, we can say initial balance and then initial balance, which is 100. And then after withdrawing the amount, which is 44, has the resulting balance, and then we got 56 over here to print out. Okay, that's exactly how you can trace the program. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to you. So now we have traced 4 different cases for you. 3 of them, the first 3 of them will simply go into the if branch. And whereas the 4th case, let's highlight the execution path, is just going to be, we're still going to execute this line unconditionally, execute these lines also unconditionally, and also evaluate this condition as well, because it returns false over here. So we are just going to execute the part that's under the else. So this is the execution flow. Okay, you can see the only one that's bypassed was this part over here. You can see this one is the only line that's not highlighted. Okay, so now you really want to make sure you understand the execution path for the if else statements. Okay, again, to recap before we end the video, always you have to evaluate the condition over here that's inside the round parentheses for the if branch. If it is true, you go into the if branch. Otherwise, you go to the else branch. Okay, either way. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And then I'm going to end the video over here, and then we'll see other cases for the if statements.